Hello, and welcome to Glasgow on the third day of our conference, and welcome to those of you that are joining this session via the live stream. Welcome to wherever you are in the world. This session is being recorded, and you'll be able to access the live stream for in about 10 days' time via the online conference platform, and the details are available in the conference brochure. So this is all the kind of, if you've been here for all 3 days, then this is the standard sort of boilerplate information that you're getting at the start of each session, apart from that bit that I went off script on. For those of you that are here in the room in 3D, you've got the option to ask questions via Slido. Details will be on the screen at some point, but again, if you've been here for a couple of days, you'll know how that works. That means we give people the opportunity to ask questions from wherever, but there will be an opportunity if you're in the room, to put your hand up and we'll find you with a microphone as well. I'm being advised to turn phones to silent because it may interfere with equipment. I've not experienced that yet, but today might be the day. And of course, really important, in the event of an emergency, an announcement will be made asking everyone to evacuate the venue and head to the nearest available exits, so check your exits now. The assembly point is between the SEC Centre and SEC Armadillo. Follow the crowds heading that way. You mustn't come back into the building until official announcements have been made by the SEC. So that's for everybody in the room. For those of you online, I hope you know what to do in the event of an emergency. We haven't catered for all of you, so good luck, and I hope you get out safely. We won't hear your alarms either, so sorry about that. This session, we're really pleased that this session is sponsored by Legacy of Lives, who are a gold sponsor of our conference. So thanks very much to Legacy of Lives for their support, and you can find them in the exhibition area as well. So that's the boilerplate stuff. That's the standard stuff. Our conference theme is finding a way forward, and this session aims to really inspire you to think about how we move forward and enhance the care that we provide using digital and technology. And we're going to build a bit on some of the conversations that we're starting to have yesterday. My name's Steve Thorlby-Coy. I'm Director of IT and Digital Services at Hospice UK, and I joined Hospice UK early this year. I'm quite new to the sector, but I've worked in various kind of IT and change roles in different sectors. As part of our Future Vision project, I'm really keen to understand where the hospice sector is at in terms of its use of technology and digital. And then I want to see how we might improve that. So in my short time here in the sector, I've noticed some really, really good work going on. So I think this session is about to shine a light on some of that. So regardless of where you're at with your IT and digital journey, I'm sure that we can all learn from each other. So what you're going to hear in this session is, you're first going to hear from our friend Julie at Wilson-Dodd, who's our transformation consultant. She's worked with a range of forward-thinking hospices and will share some inspiring examples of how they're innovating to deliver even better services. And then following Julie, you're going to hear from Nigel Seymour, who's Deputy Chief Exec at Princess Alice Hospice. He's going to talk about the digital transformation journey that they've been on, including perhaps some of the highs and lows and lessons learned along the way. I'm going to look out for questions on the screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can towards the end of the session. So, Julie, thanks. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Good, this mic is working. We're already off to a good start. It's so lovely to be here and to have heard so many inspiring conversations and talks so far about the incredible work that happens in this sector. I feel like I would describe myself as a friend to the sector. I'm not somebody who works in hospices day to day, but I've been lucky enough to work with a range of hospices, particularly over the last year or so, to help them work out how they can scale what they do, reach more people, provide that incredible quality of end-of-life care in new and potentially more scalable and sustainable ways. I'm going to share a bit of, I think, the context that we are working in the end-of-life sector, particularly how digital technologies and data-driven approaches are changing our lives. And kind of on that note, I like to start with a quote in these presentations, and this one: we always overestimate the impact of the technological change that will happen in the next 2 years and underestimate the change over the next 10. Now, Bill Gates said this a while ago, and in the 20 or so years I've been working in digital design and technology related fields, I've definitely found this to be true. Every time I get excited about a new technology trend, a couple of years in, I'm like, oh, it's not really going anywhere. And I maybe lose some of that enthusiasm, and then slightly further down the line, I reflect on the fact that that particular type of technology has fundamentally changed how we do so many things. And I think we're right at the cusp in the hospice sector of seeing how digital data technology infrastructure is starting to radically change the work that happens. Now, on that note, I'd like you to just pause for a minute, a little bit of getting the brain working first thing in the morning of a conference day, and answer this question for yourself. So what aspect of modern life would your younger self have been amazed by? So I'd like you to just take, a minute and think about that. So I haven't given you very long, but so for me, one of the things that my younger self would not have ever been able to imagine is that I carry around with me a map of almost everywhere in the world. And as somebody with a terrible sense of direction, I mean, getting here this morning was, a minor triumph for me. The fact that I have a map with me all of the time, I think is something that my younger self could not have imagined. Maybe you imagine the kind of things that, the kind of smartphone era has brought, like this picture of a bunch of people on a bridge, of like the sort of 4 or 5 people that you can actually see their hands. 3 of them are on their phone and not to their ear, they're busy doing something with it, whether that be contacting loved ones in any time zone, in any place around the world, from checking answers to any fact-based question, online banking, listening to music of any kind from anywhere, maybe checking the football scores even if you're at a conference. These are the kind of things that we have just adapted to as humans pretty seamlessly. And those effects in our lives are equally true in our work. Now, so many different examples that could be relevant in the hospice sector. I think the kind of contactless payments, which is not a new technology by any way, shape or form, is one that is starting to shift fundraising very significantly. Now, I was talking to a charity that I work with about how they've made the shift to using contactless donations, contactless payments at events, those kinds of things, using iZettles or SumUps, those kind of card reading type devices. And they said the impact of the pandemic, and I'm sure probably 90% of conference talks have mentioned the pandemic at some point. It's like bingo. There's my tick, I've said it. But the impact of COVID on shifting how much people use contactless technology for giving has really changed things. So to give an example, for a fundraising walk event in a particular location in 2018, this charity introduced online donations, so contactless donations and payments, and they took £40 out of an £800 overall donation event. In 2019, they took just over £100 through contactless, on about overall the same amount of money raised. They then had a 2-year hiatus in that event because of the pandemic. Came back in 2021, same event, same location, a lot of the same people still doing it, and took over £750 in contactless donations. And the overall amount they raised was well over £1.5 grand. Now, not everybody uses contactless payments. We are in a bit of a kind of crunch point about people who still want to use cash and the importance of cash and how we continue to process things like checks, which I think a lot of the world think don't exist, but they still really exist if you take donations. But these kinds of technologies are really shifting, and if we don't pay attention and we don't try and adopt them, we start to fall behind. Start to see changes in expectations in all sorts of different ways. So the kind of proliferation of delivery companies, whether it be Uber Eats or Deliveroo, or how Amazon approaches deliveries, the ability to get same-day deliveries, especially if you live in a city, I think is shifting people's expectations of customer service. People expect to get things now, and they expect to have a constant feedback, dialogue about what is happening with that thing that they want. I'm not sure that people have yet got that expectation about end-of-life care, but I suspect it will come. And how will we respond if people expect from us that we are constantly telling them what is going on in their end-of-life care plan or their family members' end-of-life care plan? All of these things have not just direct effects, are you using the technology, are you not, but they change the way we think about and approach our lives in the world. Now, there's loads of really wholesome effects of modern technology. So I bring up an example of the democratization of education, the availability of online education at all levels, from short courses through to full degrees and masters. And in a 30-second look, it really was, I found multiple courses about end-of-life care and palliative care. This is a short course by a respected university that's free, 3 weeks, 4 hours, not very much. But there are whole degrees. And I start to think about, well, okay, what could we do with these kinds of technologies, these kinds of approaches, to help more people understand end of life? Or for professional development, both kind of in terms of, CPD, but also how do you keep developing the skills of your workforce? Well, there's really cost-effective ways of doing it now through online education. Another big boon, I think, is the kind of huge shift we're seeing in assistive technologies becoming very everyday. Now, I have to say I've never actually tried using closed captioning in Zoom with dogs, but I have used them regularly in meetings, in workshops, in seminars. And what it means is a whole range of people who might have had some access needs can now be part of a conversation. You start thinking about the impact of that in end of life when people get an increasingly complex range of needs. And sometimes, yes, that means that they couldn't use, Zoom, for example, but the improvement in hearing aids is a great example where we start to see real improvements in quality of life through the way that these assistive technologies are improving year on year. I've talked a lot about digital technology, so let's talk a bit about data. Now, I worked at Parkinson's UK for 5 years as Director of Transformation, and one of the big shifts we saw was about the power of research data when you apply data science techniques and AI to it. Sounded so futuristic, but actually what machine learning as a particular part of AI can offer in medical research is the ability to trawl through all of those papers that have been published about clinical studies. It can go through all of those raw data sets that have been generated by every piece of research, and it can look for new clues to cures, to better treatments, the kinds of things that will definitely improve the quality of life for people, even with kind of chronic conditions, but also will prolong the end-of-life period for a lot of people. And that will have a very direct impact on the hospice sector, I think. So these kind of techniques where we're finding answers all the time to, cancer, to Parkinson's, to Alzheimer's, dementia, it's going to really shift the way that those conditions are treated and managed, but it's not going to cure them overnight. So I think it will start to shift the patient populations and the needs of the patient populations coming to us. And you all work in a world where you're very familiar with the impact of technology in healthcare, whether you think telemedicine is a good or a bad thing, whether the consultants and practitioners that you work with tend to do all of their telehealth on the phone or via video. But these kind of technologies are absolutely here to stay. And I think the next generation of that, where technology is going to go in health, about personalized medication, those kinds of things, again, will be really impactful for patients, for professionals, but certainly for us in that shift of trying to manage those changes, there's an awful lot to learn and keep across. Now, it's not all positive. There's a big conversation that's always relevant about digital inclusion and exclusion. And the one thing that I've often said to people when they say, well, yeah, this is all great, all of those things, yeah, there's opportunities, but what about the people who are not online or can't be online because of physical access needs, end of life? And you're like, yeah, I might not be spending all my time on a screen. Well, you might be, or you might not be. The importance here is about data-driven approaches and digital technologies enable our work so that we as humans can go and do more of the stuff that we do really well. And I think that's the kind of critical point here. Not everything has to be technology-driven. We need to find ways to use technology to enable our work so that we can do more, because there is always more need. I doubt anyone in this room is sat here thinking, yeah, basically, we can always be there as much as we'd like to be for the patients and families that we exist to serve. I'd be amazed. If you have cracked that, please let the rest of us know. And then I think it's important to look just, one step ahead. And it is only one step, it's not 2 or 3. In the background is a picture of all of the companies that are making fairly major investments and plays into the metaverse world. And metaverse is one of those things where I hear it and I'm like, oh, that makes my head hurt. What is it? And it's being defined as we exist and live and breathe, but in a kind of very broad sense. It is about the virtual lives that we are living, will increasingly be living, and how they blur with our kind of physical reality. It already exists in a kind of gaming and VR and those spaces, but the effects are going to be probably, back to that Bill Gates quote, in the next 2 years we'll see a lot of very weird experiments and think, not really for me. But 10 years down the line, this is going to be the land we're living in. And Satya Nadella, who's the chief exec at Microsoft, says the metaverse is here. It's not only transforming how we see the world, but how we participate in it, from the factory floor to the meeting room. Now, I'm not sure it's quite here in that way yet, but it will be soon. And I can't tell you what effect that's going to have on end-of-life care, but I can tell you it will have an effect. And then, the real downsides of technology, like, how do we continue to defend ourselves against people like Elon Musk who mess about with tried and tested technologies? He's a bit of a joke, but a very dangerous man. Twitter is a platform that we use in marketing and engagement to talk to people about end of life, to explain about our services. People like this come in and start to really affect how charities do marketing. They're definitely not thinking about that. We also have to worry about cybersecurity, the kind of online harms that can happen, particularly for vulnerable people on social media. But I want this conversation to be about opportunity, because I think the opportunities that exist in end-of-life care are pretty amazing. And I'm already starting to see the effects of that with some of the hospices I'm working with. And we've got so many challenges. So like, how might digital and data-driven approaches help us tackle common challenges? How is that starting to happen? Well, we know that one of the common challenges is that people who need you aren't aware of your services. And if they are aware, access isn't equitable. In a dream scenario, someone needing end-of-life support is directly referred to their local hospice, and that hospice is there for them at the right time and has all of the availability that they need to support them and their family. But that isn't the case. Discoverability of hospice services, getting a timely referral, is an ongoing challenge. And we also know that there are groups in every part of society who do not know or think that hospice care is for them. We have to start leaning into that and working out some new solutions. One of the things, not in hospice care, but in a kind of sidestep world, when I was working at Parkinson's UK, we had a similar problem in that people did not discover that Parkinson's UK existed, and if they did, it was 8, 9 years into their diagnosis, way after the point where if we'd been there at day one and said, it's going to be difficult, but it's going to be all right, we can help you with this, and by the way, you need to do more exercise than you've ever done in your life, because it's the only thing that slows progression of Parkinson's. Hearing that on day one, rather than 8 years down the line of negative progression, is life-changing. So what we did at Parkinson's UK was ran a whole service redesign program, looking at how we delivered things like our helpline and our local advisor, basically local social worker service, or online communities or online information, and found that the pinch point was that moment of diagnosis. If people were lucky, they were handed a leaflet from Parkinson's UK, may or may not have been out of date, and then it usually got filed away in a drawer because it was too much for people to think about. Now, Parkinson's UK has a service where, in that moment, the consultant or Parkinson's nurse in the immediate follow-up can say, would you like to get some ongoing support from Parkinson's UK after this moment where you've just been told you've got a life-changing diagnosis? Funnily enough, most people say yes. It's a simple online form that the consultant or the nurse can access just in a standard web browser. They say, who are you, the patient or their loved one? You get slightly different journeys depending on which. Yes, we would like that. There's obviously a data consent sharing. That gets sent automatically to Parkinson's UK, and then they pick it up. Now, they can pick it up with organising a phone conversation with an advisor. There's a kind of tailored automated email journey. But those kind of things, the ability for technology to help you as a hospice be there as a timely referral, I think is one of the biggest shifts that we all need to make. We know that a current challenge is that people want to be, or a lot of people would like to be at home, and also there isn't capacity or safety, particularly because of the pandemic, in the clinical environment right now. But how do we enable people to do that? You can't just say, well, you have to be in a ward or in a bed, or you have to be at home without anything. And this is where the kind of things like end-of-life virtual wards are coming in. I use an example of Greenwich and Bexley Community Hospice, who are just exploring a new virtual ward for end-of-life there. And what it means for them is that by using remote monitoring technologies, they're allowing patients to be at home, but maintaining that really good visibility among clinical and support staff of what is happening with that patient in their home environment, so that timely interventions can be made based on the data flowing in from that virtual ward. They see it as a massive opportunity for technology to really support both staff and patients, and actually monitoring people more through this home-based setting because of the availability of data. And obviously for the patient, having that control back, having that quality time back with their families is so precious. There's all sorts that they're doing around this, like building outcome measures into the virtual ward project and using it as a test bed for new ways of kind of monitoring and embedding PROMs, patient-reported outcome measures, into their work. But I think they're not the only hospice that's exploring virtual wards, but I think this is going to be a big, big part of the next decade of hospice care. It makes things so much more scalable and sustainable with relatively cheap technologies. Symptom management continues to be and will always be a major challenge in end-of-life care. Like for some conditions or some side effects, some symptoms of people's experience, drugs and conventional therapies alone just aren't working well enough. And what's interesting is looking at what's happening in dementia, mental health, pain, those kind of things that relate to so many conditions. So many of the patients in hospice care experience those things, and the drugs are only kind of halfway to dealing with that. This is where I think we need to start as a sector looking out into the market more. We shouldn't try and create all of the technologies ourselves. We're not set up to do that, and we don't need to. There is a whole world of brilliant providers out there, creating things like exercise programs, virtual physio, sleep apps. There's loads of clinically approved sleep apps. Ways of helping people just monitor their medication intake. Those kind of things that make the everyday misery, I'm going to call it, of living with an end-of-life or chronic condition just even slightly better. That's the kind of app side of things, which, again, those aren't new technologies. Those things have been around for ages. What's slightly newer is the big increase and the big investment that's happening in the health tech market around wearables. So on the left-hand side there is a device called Thrive, called Sensate by Thrive Wearables. And what it does is it claims to, I think they're in the middle of a clinical trial right now, help reduce anxiety and relieve pain. In the bottom right is one from my kind of Parkinson's days. It's a little device that you can place here called Q by Charco Neurotech. And again, it's going through a clinical trial at the moment, but I've seen it on people visibly reduce some of their physical Parkinson's symptoms, from bradykinesia, stiffness, improving walking gait, reducing tremor. These kind of wearables, even though some of them are relatively new, and there's a whole bunch of hokum in the market as well, some of them are going to go on to provide real improvements in quality of life. And the one in the background, Oura, I include, not because I think it's particularly relevant to end-of-life care. It's a monitoring device. It looks at things like sleep, physical activity, heart health. But I include it because it's just a ring. It just looks like a ring. These kinds of things are becoming really usable, really don't look like medical devices, because no one wants to look and feel like a patient. And I think they will become an increasingly big part of how the medical world deals with supporting people. So not just drugs, but drugs and devices. And then one that's in the kind of slightly more fun sphere, St Giles, amongst a handful of others, have created VR experiences as experiments in how they can reduce anxiety, pain, mental health symptoms, sometimes for dementia, for hospice patients. I include this one of Forest of Serenity because I think it's a really beautiful execution of a VR product. And what it does is it walks you through a beautiful, exotic paradise forest, voiced by David Attenborough. Everything that I've seen about Forest of Serenity and most of the other VR projects that have gone on in the end-of-life care space seem to demonstrate that this stuff really does work. And this is maybe that first step into the metaverse. I can't give you all a VR headset now. I am going to play just a tiny bit of the video because I think it's a really lovely thing to have first thing on a Thursday to give you just a little sense of it. It's a bit dark on the screen. Can you hear that? No, I don't think we can hear David Attenborough. No, that's a shame. If you could hear the audio along with these visuals, which, you know, when you're in a VR headset are fully immersive, you can hear David Attenborough just quietly talking you through the different flora and fauna.
Observe the many shades of colour as you look around at the trees and plants. An exotic bird of paradise performs a beautiful and enchanting dance.
Now, it might be nice just to stay in that place for a little while longer, and I can share that video clip with you. It's available on YouTube. It might seem gimmicky to talk about VR in an end-of-life setting, but these projects seem to work. Taking people out of, well, the misery of everyday life sometimes when your physical and maybe cognitive abilities are really restricted, and into a place like that, is that not something that maybe all of us might want? And again, these technologies are not that expensive. We also know that one of the big problems in the sector is that people don't feel like in control over what happens. You know, as we get iller, often what happens is we have less and less agency in our own lives, and that is a really, really unpleasant experience for anyone. Now, again, not the only hospice to do this, but St Christopher's, who I think have one of the best System 1 setups that I've certainly seen in the sector, they are rolling out AirMid, which is the patient-facing app part of the System 1 setup, so that patients in their care have the ability to interact much more directly, have much more input into what is going on in their end-of-life care. That's things like having simple things like questionnaires to capture things like demographic and protected characteristic data even before their first appointment, so that those things don't need to take up any time when they're actually speaking to the hospice staff. It's about carers' assessment, views on care, already being able to feed back more and more about, I guess, the things that feed into patient-reported outcomes. Having that sense of control over what is going on, we know makes people feel better in that moment. And I think adopting tools like AirMid, which just is part of the whole System 1 universe that so many hospices are already in, is a really, really good step in helping patients have some more control and some more say about how their hospice care experience is going. There's also, again, looking out in the market, an absolute raft of digital legacy and advanced care planning tools. People having conversations with their loved ones and their families about their wishes is really important, and hospices do a great job of, you know, verbally talking to people about that. But we should be automating this kind of thing. We should be putting together packs of information that get automatically sent to patients and their families to help them with this stuff. And there's loads of great tools. These are just two of them, Afternote and My Wishes. There are absolutely tons of fantastic tools out there that we can and should be sending people onto. And then, you know, one final challenge that we know is that no one's ever prepared for bereavement and grief. And it's another one where we can do things ourselves. And on this next screen, I include on the left, this is a poster about a physical death cafe, but St Oswald's, amongst others, have successfully run virtual death cafes, just spaces for people to come together and convene and talk about it. And sometimes the virtual feedback has been the virtual scenario provides people with a slightly safer space than having to, you know, go to maybe a physical location. There's also services like Grief Chat, where you can refer people on to, you know, we can't scale up the bereavement services that we do. I just don't think we can in the hospice sector alongside everything else. But there are others out there who are doing that. So refer people on. And there's such a great raft of grief content, digital content out there. I often see on hospice websites the worst pages about bereavement, which is like, we know this is really sad and here's a list of links. Like, tailor. Pull in the best of what's already out there and refer people onto a handful of good quality sources. I include Grief Works, which is a podcast produced by a grief counsellor with 25 years experience. And those kinds of things can really, they can't fix things, but they can make the grief experience even slightly better. It's got to be worth it. I need to be conscious of time. So, a little watch out for you I'm very enthusiastic about, as you might have noticed, in hospices taking digital and data-driven approaches. But avoid the temptation to assume the answer is an app, a new website, or a chatbot. I get so often into conversations with hospices and other charities where the automatic leap is into a product, a digital product, and these things are familiar. We know that these are technologies that exist. Do not try and create an app. There is a reason why very few UK and US hospices have apps. It's because we are not set up to build them and maintain them. They take loads of work. Looking outside into the market, as I said, refer to the right things, bring in the right things, and think about how those technologies and those data-driven ways of working really underpin your work before you leap to assuming it's a product. And start small. The other thing, I see these projects of like multi-year big things, like, oh, okay, that's huge. And start small and kind of create, test, and iterate is really my kind of mantra with any foray into any new space. And it's particularly true if you're exploring new kind of digital and data ways of working. So just a handful of things that I've seen in the hospice sector that I think really are examples of hospices that are making the right moves, the right bold moves in this space. And I've mentioned St Christopher's before, and I think they really are a leader in thinking about the roles of digital, data-driven ways of working, new models for working internally. And that's because they are having a bigger conversation. This picture is from a workshop that we did together earlier in the year, looking at the role of technology for different patient and clinical scenarios. And they came up with loads and loads of different, fantastic ideas. Off the back of it, they are introducing some digital screens on their wards that show photos of staff so everyone knows who's meant to be where, who's in charge of the shift. Just that information sharing is one of the things that was a real problem for them, that they found a nice, easy solution to fix. They are exploring some VR for their inpatient unit at the moment. They've started a partnership, well, they've been in it for a while, a partnership with Helix, which is a service design centre exploring really interesting and novel techniques for managing patient care at home. But the key thing here, the reason I put this picture up rather than a picture of any particular technology they're using, is because they're having this conversation. This is people from all across their hospice coming together to talk about it together. Not, we asked the digital team to do a thing, we asked our outsourced IT team to do a thing, or we just talk about it in fundraising and marketing, or we just talk about it in services. This needs to be a whole hospice conversation. I like to champion Greenwich and Bexley Community Hospice, not just because of the great things they're doing, like that virtual ward, but also because they have put this as a commitment at the heart of their plans. In their new strategy, they have 3 priorities, and this is the third one: making the most of technology to assist us in delivering outstanding care, increasing reach, demonstrating impact, and maximising income. There it is, bold as brass, one of 3 things that they think is going to make the next big shift for them as a community hospice. It's that kind of boldness that everybody needs. It can't be an add-on. It can't be the thing that, oh yeah, we should talk about it, we'll get around to it later. It needs to be there at the heart of the work. And you've got to have the skills and leadership to drive it. And I'm not going to point at her because she's in the room, but I think Keach did a brilliant, brilliant thing in deciding when they had a vacancy on their senior leadership team that instead of just sticking with the tried and tested, we've always had these kinds of directors for a while, so we'll just reappoint the same kind of person again. They really asked the question of, what is it that we need in terms of change? Do we have the skills amongst our top table to feel really confident leading a shift in how we deliver some kinds of end-of-life care? And so they've appointed an executive director of engagement, innovation and digital, which is brilliant, already making a really big impact there. But I think, again, it's that kind of boldness. Yes, there might have to be compromises made to make space for this, but at every level, have you got the skills? Because if you don't have people who've done it before, it's really difficult to find the confidence to try doing something new. And if you do find the confidence to try doing something new and something goes a bit wrong, it's then the temptation to just run away from it again. So having leaders that really get this, who are really committed, it doesn't mean everybody needs to learn everything about technology, but it does mean having some people around you who can confidently guide you through it. So that is enough from me. I think I've maybe even run slightly over, sorry. I'm going to hand over now to somebody who has been living this at the coalface. And Nigel and I have known each other for a long old time. But I think the conversation that we had last year about some of the changes, digital transformation that's been happening at Princess Alice Hospice, including the highs and lows, I think, as you said in your kind of programme, really speak to what's possible if you commit to this kind of change. Thanks very much.
Wow, how inspiring was that? And for someone who's been kind of living and breathing this for the past few years, you need those kind of injections of inspiration. So thank you, Julie. My role today really is to take you through what we've been living with at Princess Alice. It's not in any way saying that we're experts in this. This is just how we have gone through the process. So hopefully, for those of you that have yet to start any form of kind of digital journey, this will be incredibly useful for you. For those of you that are on it, maybe it will give you a few hints and tips. And for those of you that are more advanced from us, please come and talk to me, because we all need to help and share together. So, any journey has a start, and for us, we wanted to look at building the foundations. It was actually back in 2016-17 that we started to understand how important digital could be for our future delivery. And as Julie said, to get that scope and to make sure that we could start meeting the demand that was out there, because like most hospices, we were only touching a fraction of the people that absolutely needed that palliative and end-of-life care. And so, whilst the senior leadership team were getting excited about it, we recognised that we needed to grow that excitement across not only our board, but our wider leadership team as well. So we looked out there to see who was doing it well, and we came and found Parkinson's, and Julie was very kind to let a member of her team come to our annual general meeting and talk about what they were doing around Parkinson's Connect. It was a real opportunity to inspire and help people, including our board, understand the what could be. And after that point, it was much easier to have conversations in the organisation, because they'd heard from what could happen, how they could be done. We then backed that up by actually creating a role at the senior leadership table with digital in the title. And that was really important as well. It was a kind of key signifier to the rest of the organisation that digital was going to be important to us. We were committing time, energy and resource to this. And I held that brief and still hold it, and start championing digital throughout the whole organisation. And to support that, there were really good pockets of digital innovation happening in the hospice, but we weren't kind of collating this together. We weren't helping to share that learning. So we brought a central team together that was going to be responsible for working alongside our colleagues, inspiring them to try something new. And around about a year after that team came about, we introduced our technology colleagues as well. So at that centre, we've got a technology, digital and data team that are there to help the organisation achieve its aspirations. The next stage for us was to actually understand where we were. So the NCVO have a really useful tool to help measure digital maturity. And it has a number of domains, from leadership and strategy through to communications and content, how you're doing on your technology infrastructure, how you're using data and insights, and also about that kind of really important topic of data and data protection. And we found that we were at a low starting point. Well, quelle surprise, that's what you would expect if you're on the start of a journey. But what we have used that tool to do is every other year we measure ourselves against it to see how we're doing, and to give ideas and direction about where we should be trying harder in different parts of the hospice. And then once we understood that, it was about going out and setting what would be the right first strategic approach for us in digital. This was about reaching out across the organisation. This was not about the centre team saying, this is how we will do it. This was about working alongside everyone and trying to get an understanding about what could it be. And an important learning here was around the use of language. Transformation can be a scary word. And certainly when we were starting this work, people were scared by that. So we decided to dial down the word transformation and just try and dial up what actually is digital. Try and get some definition out there. How would it make a difference? And fundamentally, this was about making sure we could give time back to our clinical colleagues to do more care, time back to our income generation colleagues to raise more money, time back to our back office functions in order to be able to be more effective and efficient in how we run the hospice. So this was an added benefit rather than any form of replacing roles or people. And this is our digital strategy. It's quite simple. We're there to kind of try and build that connected organisation, and we do this in 4 different ways. So we want to inspire people, and that is a lot about building skills. Skills at the centre, so our specialist team know what they can do and how they can support, but also everyday digital skills across every member of our workforce, and that is about staff and volunteers who are an incredibly important part of the overall mix. This is about making sure that we try and have that innovation within the organisation and look at new ways of working. So we've done a lot around digital working and helping to bring on tools that will make life easier and simpler for people. Increasing engagement. So we've talked a lot around making sure that the people that we exist to serve actually have a voice in that conversation, that we want to get more understanding about what our different audiences and stakeholders actually need and want. And that's also around helping in some of that kind of testing, making sure that we have an assumption and we make sure that we test that as well. And then evolving our services, really important. We've just seen a huge array of what could be, and if that's not front and centre about how we need to evolve what we want to do in palliative and end-of-life care, then really we shouldn't be occupying that digital space. So we're looking around bereavement and patient care. We're also looking about education and research as well. And finally, making sure everything that we do was sustainable. So this is fundamentally about having the right technology structure, having those fundamental basics around digital giving for our fundraising colleagues, making sure that we've got the right kit in place, and above all, making sure that there was good structure around cybersecurity and those protections, because there is a lot of risk that comes with digital, and that's not to scare people, but it's about recognising that and managing that risk. And often some of that risk is about not doing things as well. So be careful around just mitigating and to a point where you stop doing something. But with every great plan, and here's my bingo moment, COVID came along. And for us, what a great opportunity it presented in terms of it changed the pace of what we were delivering and the hunger in the organisation around what we wanted to deliver. Lots of different examples here of what we were able to do. So like many colleagues in this room, we turned to kind of video consultations. Overnight, we had to make our working model hybrid, so our staff could work effectively at home and keep services running. We actually turned our wellbeing service into a virtual wellbeing service, and that has been incredibly positive. It, first of all, increased the diversity of the people who are accessing the service. Secondly, it increased the reach. And so we have kept with that model coming out of COVID. And actually, there's a really great opportunity for collaboration here amongst hospices. We've just seen how we can complement some of those wellbeing services with apps in the market. But what about that content that we are producing day in, day out as hospices? How could we create that? How could we bring that onto a platform? How could we share that so many more people could be accessing those vital services alongside other parts of their pathway? Education here were another fantastic kind of changer for what we wanted to do. Again, lots of critical environments like care homes needed that support during COVID-19, and our education team were able to dial in, zoom into those environments, give much needed on-the-spot support, and along with our flagship European Certificate in Essential Palliative Care programme, we have converted that to be a fully online learning process now, and that has doubled the number of people who are going through that certificate each and every year. And that's about how, again, as Julie said, we can democratise learning and make sure that everyone, no matter where you are in the world, can participate and learn from the best. The other kind of real life challenge for us was we experienced a malware attack. Now, I raise this again not to kind of scare you, although I can remember the phone call that I received when eating my breakfast one day to say, I'm really sorry, but I think we're under attack on our servers. This is about saying that things will come up. This is the real world that we're living in. It's not if you will get attacked, it's when you'll get attacked. And it's about how you respond to that. And so this is a classic crisis management response. We put lots of things in place. We already had good, strong backups and disaster recovery, but it was our real-life test to make sure they actually happened. And we learned an incredible amount through this process. We learned how important it was to keep communications clear and consistent to our users, because they just lost everything straight away. And of course, we're caring for vulnerable people, so our priority was to get our services back up and running as quickly as possible. We did that within a 24-hour period. We then had to look at all the things that came with that as well. We managed to make sure that no data was breached, and one of the kind of key learnings that I would absolutely recommend, if you do not have it at the moment, get cyber insurance as part of your overall insurance portfolio. They were incredibly supportive for us. They had resources that we just wouldn't be able to retain ourselves, and it made the process of restoring and growing so much better. So where are we now? Well, we have started from a small base of focusing around how do we make our business sustainable through digital, to making sure that digital actually is in every part of our business. We've got conversations happening now around service development. We've got conversations happening around movements around back office function. And what that has underscored as well is that where we need to put that impetus, the investment of time, money and resource at a strategic level, we've absolutely pulled that out and made those resources available. And I'll touch on one of those projects shortly. We've seen an increase in capabilities across the organisation and that confidence to use that. And we started new partnerships because we recognise that we can't have every skill that we need on our staff. And so making sure you find credible partners to work with is really important. And we found 2 or 3 of those that are really helping shape the delivery that we're now doing. Our board has scaled up, and I'm really pleased to say, under the leadership of Sean Hilton, our chair, we have now got 3 digital specialists as trustees. And that's really important to make sure that they can help inspire, bring in that specialist sector knowledge, and help us in that kind of growth around how we want to innovate our care going forward. We've bought lots of kit, and we're in that process of developing that data roadmap to really help grow our digital aspirations. And so the first project I just wanted to bring to your attention was one that we're doing around patient pathways at the moment. I just kind of want to talk through that in terms of what we have found as we've gone through quite a transformative piece of work. It actually started probably back in 2019 when we took the decision to move our patient record system to EMIS. It was an easy decision to make because the vast majority of the GPs in our area were operating on that platform. And it brought that kind of shared single record to the fore that we really wanted, not only to improve the patient experience, but also to give time back to our clinical colleagues, and so that they had the information in one place. And that has been a massive success. We've got data sharing agreements across 99% of our GP partners, and that sharing now is happening in a 2-way process. So that enrichment of that single record is really important, and that has given us the confidence to move forward into this patient pathway work. So the background to this work is that we are looking to review and redesign all our high-level pathways in order to improve the experience of anyone needing to access or use our services. And in scope in this project is all our customer touch points, from referral until kind of completion of support with bereaved carers, families and friends. And when we talk about customers, we're talking about patients, carers, families, and also healthcare professionals as well. So this project is live at the moment and is working incredibly well. But in order to make it work the best it could, we brought a core team together. And this wasn't about just bringing our clinical colleagues into this space. This was about making sure that everyone across the organisation had a part to play. So in the core team, we have got clinical, we've got bereavement, we've got volunteering. We've also got our digital and data and business improvement colleagues as well. And together, they act as a unit of change. And they have been driving this whole process through. comes to the point around making sure that we've got the right partner to support us. So we're working with a company called Adesse. They're very skilled in service design and pathway design, and they have come on board to work with us, not for us. We could have easily asked the company to say, can you come up and design some new pathways and then we'll implement them. But actually we would learn nothing in terms of our evolution as an organisation. So they're working with us and they're attached to this project and they're supporting this next phase, which is skill transfer into the team. So fundamentally they're helping the team understand what product design, pathway design, service design is all about with those kind of lean principles. They're talking about how change management is so important when you're bringing on new change. They're talking about how we can engage with customers and get customer insight. And this has been really important for the team because they're being taught at the same time as delivering, and they're then going to hold those skills and use them for the benefit of other pathway work across the organisation. And for the lead of this project, they're also teaching facilitation skills, because at this very moment in time, that lead is actually delivering new pathway work this week on their own, facilitating those sessions. So again, we've been able to grow the ability to do lots more for ourselves. The next stage was really to look at that data and look at what we had. So we had lots of data that told us around patient feedback, their experiences. We also had data around our activity measures, but we also had some critical gaps. And those gaps revolved around what were the patient expectations, and also when they had those expectations, how were we meeting and measuring against them. And what we also found was that our process indicators were shockingly poor. We really weren't looking at kind of the difference that we wanted to make and measuring ourselves against that. So we went into a phase of customer engagement. Again, the core project team identified the people to talk to, designed the scripts, conducted the actual interviews. So using all those skills that they learned, they were able to go out and get valuable customer insight. And yes, whilst it validated a lot of our assumptions, it also brought some key learnings that we just couldn't get in other ways. So we found out fundamentally that whilst the carer pathway was attached and aligned to the patient pathway, it needed its own pathway in its own right. It was less systematic than the patient pathway. And there were a lot of assumptions that we were making as an organisation about what they needed, how they could get in touch, when to make that call. And from a carer perspective, they just didn't have that information. They didn't know what to make when. And so it was a really valuable exercise in order to help us understand what could be. What would be the ideal scenario that we want for our kind of key stakeholders. And we mapped that out, and we then started to look at where can digital play its part in meeting that ideal state. How can it make us capture data at the right point? How can it build those connections? How can it support communication between ourselves as an organisation and that kind of customer? And also, we were looking at kind of the systems we might need in place, the data we might need to capture, and those skills and capabilities that our workforce would need in order to sustain this type of new working. And this is where we are now. We have looked at two key pathways, which are our referral pathway and our bereavement pathway. And they're both different in their own rights. And what we've started to understand is we thought our referral pathway was quite efficient and effective, but we've absolutely learned that there was many things that we can improve about it. And this is where digital can really help. So kind of electronic referral in can speed up when we get a referral. It can help share that information throughout that process much quicker. And in this process as well, we were looking at pre-referral, and which is the important point around how do we digitally market ourselves to make people aware of what services we can offer. Talking to Julie's point before, lots of people are unaware of what hospices are and what they can do, but there's lots that we can help with. And then in the bereavement pathway, it's a slightly different pathway in the fact that whilst it's coordinated by paid staff, it's majority volunteer delivered. And so this was a very admin heavy process. It was only touching a small percentage of the people that we could. And part of the barrier there was that we weren't giving access to our volunteers to the digital tools that could really make a difference in this pathway. So moving forward, it's highly likely that those volunteers will now come into the organisation and access our actual patient system in a very kind of restricted and safe way. That will enable them to record and access information to make sure our kind of people in that bereavement pathway are seen at the right time. We're also going to give them access to our internal SharePoint system, so the information that we curate at the centre can be accessed by them as well. So speeding up that whole process is kind of really important and will make a measurable difference. And all of this work has been done in 3 months. So for us, that feels really quick. There's been a commitment to release people from their business as usual to this project, but it's phenomenally changed our thinking and inspired us that we can do so much more going forward as well. So moving on to some of the things that we have learned in our journey so far. Really, any digital strategy can only have credibility in your organisations if you've put the right kit in place. This is not a kind of one-time thing, even though there'll be an upfront investment. This is an ongoing thing. So this is laptops. This is about making sure that everyone who needs to access kind of video or participate has got just a simple thing around headphones and microphones. But these are kind of sanitary things that everyone needs to have in order to operate effectively. Governance is really important in digital, and speaking as a person who's the senior information risk owner, I would say that. But making sure that you understand some of these new systems coming in place, because they are quite complex. And if you don't set things up right, you are running the risk that data will flow out in the way that you don't want to, and you're risking security breaches as well. Improvements. We're all about making improvements, as the kind of patient pathway shows, but it's about what comes first. So I talked about the fact that we introduced our patient record system, which did involve a bit of process improvement, but not to the scale and depth that we've just done. So we're now going to have to undo some much loved processes that we have learned to grow with, to make sure that we can do better. So if you are at the stage of thinking, do we need to bring on new platforms like a new patient record system, think about whether you need to do process redesign before that or as part of that process as you go forward. Lots of digital change is about adapting the way that we work. And again, lots of positives that come from that. But what we have started to find is, as we brought in automations in our business, that if, again, they're not set up right, they are attached to individuals rather than organisational accounts. And so if those individuals leave the organisation, they take those automations with you and you go backwards. So spend the time to make sure you're setting these things up correctly to make sure that you mitigate the risk of going backwards. Never underestimate how much your users need support. We are naturally wanting to bring about lots of change in my team, but not everybody wants change or gets excited by change. And so what we have found is that that first year after you bring in a significant change, people need that ongoing support from help desk to make sure that they understand the technology, that they can use it effectively. And as your digital maturity grows, that need for support absolutely comes down, but never forget that. And it's such an important thing. Leadership. Without the backing of directors and the senior leadership team, we won't be able to make the process that we need to do. I'm phenomenally lucky that I've got the backing of the SLT to make digital change in our business. I've got 2 colleagues in the room, Leslie Munro, Director of Clinical Care, and Jennifer Todd, our Medical Director, who have been passionate advocates and ambassadors for the change that we're doing around pathway work. They fundamentally understand that digital will enable us to achieve our objectives sooner and faster than we could ever do. And with that support, it means that their teams have come on board and moved much quicker than we are ever able to do in the past. So powerful advocates at the senior level, including board, are so important to make the change that you need. I talked about when we brought teams together that was really important to make sure that we could curate that specialist knowledge in the charity. But it also brings challenges as well, because different teams come with different cultures. And so working on culture with those teams is so important. And we made the decision that was because we wanted to put those teams under one director at the SLT table rather than multiple directors. And that was to basically avoid conflicts and competing demands and priority. We needed a kind of single focus of all those people involved in making that change. You don't have to do everything all at once or all together. Some of the changes can be big bang changes to your digital workplace, for example, on email, but some other changes need to be done in small select groups and need to be tested first with particular users. We've had an example where we've done all organisational training on platforms, but then understood that actually, if you're not going to use that platform immediately, that training decays, and you're just going to spend the time doing it again. So on reflection, smaller pockets of trained people across the organisation is much better if we're bringing about some significant change. And share those success stories. I can't underscore how much it is important to keep on inspiring people. We do this in a number of ways, through a weekly email from our CEO, through information on our SharePoint system, through posters on notice boards, just making people aware of the difference that digital is making to our everyday work. And make sure that you include not always the usual suspects. Put those surprises in there where people may have felt, I wasn't quite sure about this, but actually having experienced it, it's made a radical change. I'm now an advocate. Skilling up, so very important, and really is a focus for us over the next 2 years as well. As I said, be prepared to buy in that expertise and find the right partner. We can't all afford to have expensive posts in our organisations. There's got to be lots of different ways that we can get that. So we have been buying in expertise in order to help different parts of our business grow. And as I say, that's about making sure we transfer those skills in from the specialist partner to our internal teams to make sure that we're sustainable going forward. We regularly assess digital skills as well. We've just led a piece of work with our clinicians to understand where they think their skills need work, where they think their skills might be required to improve in the future. And what was really kind of surprising to us was not that there was huge ambition in there, but that just some of the basics they wanted to kind of have repeated and underscored, which goes back to the point that your kind of users, your staff constantly need that support and ability to ask those questions to make sure that they can do what we ask them to do. The other kind of key point here is make sure that you kind of don't leave people behind. It's very easy to get excited by those digital natives in the organisation, say, yes, I want to do this, I can do this. And then everyone else is trying to run really quickly to catch up to a point where they go, do you know what, I'm going to opt out. So it's really important to continually support everyone in that process, to help those people who really want to go quickly, but also to make sure that you are bringing those people who are just running a little bit slower up and supported all the time. I make the point here around the Charity Digital Skills Survey. We've participated in this, run by Skills Platform and OMR Digital. This has been a really important piece to actually understand where we are in our skill development. I definitely recommend your participation going forward. And what it underscored as well were the kind of emerging gaps that need to be filled going forward. And those were around digital fundraising, analysing that data to plan services, learning about users from website and analytics data, search engine optimization and adverts, and undertaking user research. And those are all kind of key things that we are doing over the next few weeks and months in order to embed that in our organisation. The other key piece of information to look at when looking at skills is the TOPOR review, preparing the healthcare workforce to deliver the digital future. Done back in 2019, it's a really important piece of work to take note of. One of the key outcomes of that work were 3 guiding principles. The first was about patients needing to be included as partners and informed about the health technologies that they were being asked to participate on. And here's a really important part, with a particular focus on vulnerable and marginalised groups to ensure equitable access. Second was around the workforce and how they needed that expertise and guidance to evaluate new technologies. And the third principle was around the gift of time. Wherever possible, the adoption of new technologies should enable staff to gain more time to care and promote that deeper interaction with patients. So it's a very quick and accessible read. And a key quote coming out of it was that within 20 years, 90% of all jobs in the NHS will require some element of digital skills. So it's not going away. It needs to be recognised. It needs to be understood about how you can do skill development within your organisation around digital. So finally, one of the things we have found is we needed to adapt to change. And as I said earlier, when we had the malware attack, it was a brilliant example of a high and low. On the day before, on the 8th of December, we launched our new patient record system. And on the next morning, we had the malware attack. Completely unconnected, but within a 24-hour period, our teams went from a real high to a real low. And that's just what gets thrown up when you're working in digital. So plans change, and you have to be able to adapt to that. Our maturity on digital is different to where we expected it to be at this point because of things like the malware attack. We're so much stronger and mature now on cybersecurity, but we're less mature around some of the kind of data that we wanted to do. And that's just because we have fixed resources and we needed to prioritise those resources. So things are constantly changing, constantly reprioritisation. And also it's about preparing your board because digital is constantly evolving, and so sometimes you need to invest or introduce a new idea and do it quickly. And so making sure your board is kept up to date with what is happening out there on digital, what is happening with you and your teams in the organisation and how it's linked to the strategy will enable them to better understand what they're being asked to do and how they can support. And the final point to make is that the CEOs in the room need to be passionate advocates of digital change in your organisation. We are very fortunate in Nikki Shaw to have that passionate advocate who has helped open the doors, has helped support those conversations around investment at the board table. And without that, really, you're not going to get much progress. So what's next? For us, as I said, that focus on digital skills is really important. Working with the underrepresented communities is a key strategic drive for us, and it's brilliant to see that come out as a real conference theme this week. We're going to continue to improve those pathways, work on virtual wards. It's bread and butter for hospices, and digital can make us grow that so much more and grow the scale. Data insight is going to be a key part of our future. Collaboration and innovation as well. There's so much we can do on our own, but there's so much more we can do together. And I would really, passionately request and ask the hospice movement to come together. I know Stephen's got plans to try and create that knowledge across the sector to do more, and just to constantly work at the culture in your organisations. So the final kind of thing, quote from Eric Corman, we don't have a choice on whether we digitally transform. That choice is how well we do it. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much to Julie and to Nigel. Some amazing, inspirational stuff there, hopefully for you all. I'm checking my Slido. We don't have any questions at all yet, so we might have 5 minutes of David Attenborough talking to us if we don't get any questions. But there's a problem with Slido. So there you go. We start talking about technology, and this is the real life stuff. So if anybody, apologies to those of you outside of the room, but if anybody in the room has a question and wants to put their hand up, we'll kind of go old school for that. If there are any questions. Anybody? We have a question down here. Can we try and get a microphone? Or we'll have to really shout. Just down here. Oh, we might have to move you to the microphone. Sorry about that.
Hi, thank you so much. That was really great. I'm Jackie Goss, Director of People at Lomond Hospice in Leicester. Right. I remember when email was brought in and we were told it's going to half our workload, we could get everything done by lunch, and we'd all go home, it'd be marvellous. And what happened was we all still work till 5, 6, whatever o'clock, and we do double the work, double the decision making, double the brain power, and our noggins haven't evolved at the same pace as this digital world. And my question is, we're talking about culture, I'm a bit concerned how our Neanderthal brain keeps up with the new digital world and all the technology, and how we combine the two of those. So it's part psychology and part innovation, how they come together in our daily capacity.
Wow. Does anybody feel qualified to answer that? I'm not sure I do, but...
Probably both.
Yeah.
Something.
Great question.
I think it's an amazing question. Yeah, whoever it was said that email was going to make us more efficient was, yeah, very naive. So I think there's a piece about, there's this contrast in us as humans, right? So some of the examples I gave at the start are where we just do adapt without thinking at all. So all of that kind of smartphone-y stuff, we just do it. And some of the times we don't think about bringing that same set of skills into our work, and I always find that quite interesting. But I think it's a lot in what Nigel said about make sure you're approaching the setup of new technologies right. So there's often this kind of, I see these two things. One, a real rush, like, okay, we're going to do it now. And two, basically leaving it to often IT teams and I've worked with some fantastic IT teams and I've worked with some god-awful ones. And even the really best ones, they don't work in the kind of work that most of the rest of a hospice does. And so they don't have that fundamental understanding of what it is that a particular technology needs to do. And so if you just leave them to implement it, they will implement it wrong, and it's not their fault. It's the rest of the hospice's fault for not engaging properly with them. And so I think, something the size of email, maybe the metaverse will be the next one of that, and we'll just have to test and learn, and that kind of test and learn cycle that I briefly put up is really the other answer here. Like, try something small, see if it works, test it with your kind of user base, if it's staff, or maybe it might be with patients, or it might be with clinicians, and then keep tweaking and testing. It's the going into technologies thinking it's going to be a magic solution without approaching the process properly that I think causes most of those problems.
I think I would just add that we had a fascinating conversation at one of our strategic away days with our board around boundaries and making sure around the kind of well-being of our staff versus all the new technologies that we're bringing in as well. And some of the simple ideas that were kind of raised at that point were kind of like either no email days or being very clear around how different people would use the technology, and that didn't need to say that you also needed to use that. So within our organisation, we've introduced some very simple techniques around making sure that different working patterns are kind of celebrated rather than put upon people. And I think also it's about being very clear about what the tools are there to do. So yes, email came in and kind of everything went on email, but today we probably need to redefine what email is for and then what the other tools are there to design to do. So we're just starting looking at Teams chats, for example, and what can that do and how does that work alongside removing certain traffic from email? What's its purpose? And that's not just within our organisation, it could be how we interact and support our board colleagues in their committee conversations outside of formal meetings. There are other tools that we might bring in. Again, it's about defining what is the purpose and what might we want to take away because that's no longer needed. So thinking very clearly around those different tools and making sure you don't run too much with too many.
I think I'd just add to that as well. I think something that, obviously, you mentioned the Bill Gates quote about 2 years and 10 years. I thought that was really interesting because that strikes me as something that you get a new piece of technology and it promises so much and everybody has these aspirations, what in the next year it's going to do this amazing stuff. And then over time you realise it didn't do that, but it did just something else instead, and then things move on. So there's maybe a bit of that, there's a maturity bit. So you've got to kind of go into that new technology, realising that where it is today might not be quite where you end up with it, but it'll still add loads of value. So there's perhaps a bit of that as well. We're fast running out of time, and I do now have some questions on Slido, so apologies that we're not going to get time to go through any more of those, but thanks very much for your time. And as I said in my introduction, as Nigel mentioned, we are trying to establish a network to start having more of these kind of conversations. So hopefully this has inspired you to want to kind of share and learn from each other around all things to do with technology, and I think particularly data. We had some interesting conversations about data yesterday as well. So I'm also keen to bring voices and experiences from other sectors in, as Julie mentioned. There's a lot we can learn from outside, things that are already happening in other spaces. And that's definitely the focus of this afternoon's session. I'm giving you a little plug now ahead of my session this afternoon with Ian Wright, which is called Old Map, New World. So hope you can join me for that one at 1 o'clock. And if you are interested in being part of that sort of digital technology type network, then do give me a shout. So I just want to say another big thanks to Julie and to Nigel, and thanks to everyone for joining online.